This isn't going to be a video that has a lot of hits to it, but I get the question from time to time, what kind of comics do I like? Now, I mean, first off, that question always puzzles me a little bit because honestly, I don't know why you guys care. I mean, it is, and by the way, the fact that question confuses me, I think sums up a lot of how I view comics and how I view kind of the people and kind of the fuss that often goes on around comics. I mean, I think everybody should just like what they like. I like comics, and I always get embarrassed when people say things like, "Oh, I really want to hear what you read." I mean, it always embarrasses me. One of the funnier moments when I interviewed Sean Gordon Murphy, and he turned it around and was asking me questions. I was like, not uncomfortable. Just it's like, oh, I don't deserve to be answering questions. It's just a weird. I don't know. It's my own mentality. Conversely, in my my alter ego, my other life, I've done speeches, I've done conferences, I've done panels, I've done all those kinds of things. I'm used to it. But with comics, it's my love, so I don't really get into all that. But you've asked, so I want to talk a little bit about kind of the comics I've enjoyed, the companies, how I got into all this, and who knows, maybe this is entertaining, maybe it's not. Here goes. Hey everybody, this is Perch. You've asked what comics I enjoy, and the short answer is I enjoy a lot of comics. And one thing about comics that I do that I think is different from most is in terms of the writer. Well, let me put it this way: I can pick out an artist really easily. Even when they change their style very dramatically, I can always pick out the artist in a book. And I definitely have some artists that I just love over time. And this, from all the different decades, I really liked John Romita Jr. back when he was doing Uncanny X Men way back in the day. When he came to it again, much later, after Chris Claremont had left the book and everything else, it was starting to become the new John Romita Jr. And I wasn't as fond of his style back then, but I loved his early work. Paul Smith, as well, in that book, a lot of really good things. Brett Blevins is another one who I have always loved. Brett Blevins, I've loved the way he draws women. If that makes any sense, I mean, a lot of people go for kind of the Jim Lee of women. But Brett Blevins, for me, always just very cute looking women. If that sounds kind of creepy saying it like that, but I'd always liked the way he did stuff. Michael Mignola, Morbius. I mean, there's so many. There's just so many great artists. On the other hand, with writers, it's funny because I definitely find there are writers I really enjoy and I will go read and I really like what they've done. But writers are a lot more hit and miss with me based on what it is that they're doing. I can find a writer who I really enjoy on a book, and then they go off and they do a different book, and I hate it. Maybe a good example is I thought Chuck Austin, when he did work with Superman, was reasonably solid, and then his Uncanny X Men work was awful. But so I try not to think as much about the writer. The writer is going to win my heart based on the book they're on, a lot more than just the writer. And if I start to feel like I'm, getting too much of the writer in the book, it's one of the reasons why I think Bendis probably irritates me more often than not, is because when I read the book, it reads like it's like Bendis did this. It's clear Bendis did this. And that's a selling point for some. You follow Bendis, it's a Bendis book, and reads like Bendis is Bendis. But for me, I don't like to feel the writer in the comic. I want to feel the comic first, and the writer is secondary. I think that I mean, if you look at and I would give the same complaint, although it's nowhere near the same level, to Chris Claremont. Chris Claremont definitely had some things that he would go back to. You could tell over time it was a Chris Claremont book, but usually the critique on Claremont was that he had like too many subplots and too many things going and kind of all these other pieces. And for me, I loved having all these subplots. It always felt like it was back to the characters, and that's probably why Claremont never bugged me like Bendis, where I actually think Bendis does a good job with kind of different plots and looking at things that, in unusual ways. What gets me about Bendis is the dialogue. That's what always hits me. But going back further, it's funny because I've gotten a lot of people in recent times saying that, hey, Perch, you hate Marvel. You're a lot nicer to DC, and I find that interesting because I am a definitely a Marvel guy. Definitely, I grew up with Marvel. Marvel was the first love, and I there's amazing runs. The Wolfman Perez work on Titans. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a lot of DC comics that are very near and dear to my heart. I like Frank Miller's Year One Batman. I like a lot of what Jeff Johns did in kind of the various titles that he was on. I mean, I definitely have very, very fond feelings to a lot of DC comics, but at the end of the day, Marvel was kind of where I felt I began. It's where I truly fell in love with comics, was with Marvel. And so even today, when the comics come in, there's this almost primal kind of, I've got to read the Marvel comics first. It's still wired inside my head. And I think if people start with DC, they probably have the opposite. But definitely Marvel is the one that, you could actually see it if you go way back now, more than a year, and you watch my Avengers in-game review. There's some moments where they recreated stuff from comics, and there's some kind of nods to very old storylines in there that just as moments took me right back to where I was when I was 12. And it pulls at my heart. That's the nostalgia bait that gets me every single time. um, so and maybe that's one reason why the way why I'm a little harder at times on Marvel is because I've seen them at, yeah, I don't know about what their best, but I've seen them. They've been such a big part of kind of my life and my introduction to comics that when they do really foolish things, it bugs me I think at a higher level because of that reason. And I suspect, by the way, a lot of the people who really take the piss out of Marvel on the fans who are really pissed at them, they basically I think that that's part of it. I remember some of the comics that I enjoyed though way back. If I can kind of again close my eyes, I mean, again, that X-Men run from pre Dark Phoenix all the way through kind of Blue and Gold was to me a legendary run of X Men. But a lot of people say that, so that's not giving anything new. I was a big fan of Shade the Changing Man. I liked that comic. I liked Chris Bachalo getting an early start there. I really, really like that. I like Death, the High Cost of Living. There's a lot of stuff that Vertigo was doing. What's funny to me is Sandman was never the book that really got it for me. It was Doom Patrol for sure. Shade I think was a big one. Those two books I really enjoyed. Rachel Pollack. I thought that stuff was just really new, really different storytelling. I really, really enjoyed that. And I think that those that stuff was just great stuff. I think again on the Marvel side, it's funny. There's little runs. There's an Avengers run that I've talked about before, which is right around the time Captain Marvel, and in this case we're talking Monica Rambeau, Captain Marvel, came onto the team and was introduced there and became the team lead, and then Doctor Drew had lost his mind and was kind of having this weird mind affair with Nebula and kind of the rebuilding of the team through the big Masters of Evil attack, Jarvis getting crippled. I mean, there is a run there that was just a great like 60 issue run of Avengers, and that's probably one of my favorite Avengers runs because it felt it was different from the X-Men. You could read the two side by side, and you got two different types of stories, and neither one felt like they were kind of insulting my intelligence. They both felt pretty good, pretty solid. It's funny because when we get into the 90s, it felt like a lot of storytelling kind of took a step backward. It went backward as in terms of a younger audience. And there's a lot of people who truly love the 90s, but a lot of those stories lost a lot of their depth and their complexity from the big two and then the early days of Image. I like Invincible very much. I think that was probably the first Image title that really I enjoyed. I think Kirkman's Invincible is just such a great book. A lot of fun, a lot of good aspects to that. I liked a lot of what was going on. Again, this is later Vertigo now. I liked Why the Yes Man. I liked DMZ. I liked Ex Machina. I liked those books a lot. I thought those were really well done, really nice. And then I mentioned it before. Over on the manga side, I'm a sucker for Rumiko Takahashi. So again, that might surprise people because I think that slice of life as a genre is kind of been overused, and it's a I mean I don't know, it's a phrase that I dislike these days because it's like, oh, I'm really into slice of life, kind of more quiet stories and everything else. And I've read in my mind the best of those, and that's Mie-san Aihuko by Rumio Takahashi. I think that it doesn't get better than that. That is slice life. When Scott Pilgrim and some of this other stuff came along later, and I thought Scott Pilgrim was a fine enough book. It's funny. I have no issues with Pilgrim. I have a lot of issues with the 8,000 people that decided they want to copy Scott Pilgrim and poorly. That's where it went off the rails for me. But Pilgrim was fine. But Takahashi's work, I think one, it translates very well. A lot of people, it's not manga as people think of as stereotypical manga. Ranma One Half and Lum is a little bit more of a wacky concept and everything else. But Mie-san is wonderful. I have a T-shirt that says Pew Pew that I still wear around, and like one out of 5,000 people will recognize it and be like, ah, Takahashi, and I'm like, yeah. I go to Japan and people mob me over that shirt. It's just weird the way that works. But I definitely think today in modern times, I think My Hero Academia is probably telling one of the best superhero books out there right now. It's a Kate book, and it's probably one of the best. You have very threatening villains. You have kind of coming of age superhero story. You have really diverse power sets. I mean, it's funny. I think the X-Men in the 80s is what My Hero Academia is today. That's kind of what you've got. If you haven't checked those out, a lot of people I think get resistant to going down the direction of manga. They think they're having to buy into a whole other subgenre of thing, and it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to go nuts. There are a lot of weird gatekeeping manga fans out there who will, like, you don't deserve to read this unless you read these 800 other things. It's like just pick up My Hero. It's easy to do. I've mentioned before, my kids absolutely adore One Piece. They love it. I think if you're a parent or you've got kids and you're trying to get them to comics, especially if they're in that if they're in that 7 to 10 range, and they like Dogman, but they're looking for something a little bit more complex. You're looking for something a little bit more complex. One Piece is just brilliant. You can get them into it. They get very excited. As an adult, you can watch that stuff. You know that old phrase people would say that the reason why Pixar movies are so successful is parents could take their kids to those, and they could get some entertainment for them too. One Piece is like that. You will get entertainment as an adult, and it doesn't feel kind of this forced, inorganic. Here's some bait for you, parent. It feels pretty good. And the other funny part is kind of like I feel about X-Men. If you're able to go back to giant size X-Men and work your way up, not modern giant size, but 70s, late 70s giant size. That's I mean, you're in for such a. I mean, treat is kind of that word doesn't even sum it up well enough. You're getting a comic. When you're getting hundreds of comics, you're getting a year's worth of entertainment. And I've had such happy moments. That's how I felt with My Hero Academia. I remember I picked it up very late in the game, and there'd been at least 100. There's at least 20, 30 volumes out, and I read it. I picked up 3. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to give this a try. And I read through the 3, and I'm like, all right, I need to go get the next 15. And I just had such a happy feeling going to getting again, knowing that there was all that story in front of me. I mean, what a great feeling that is. And I definitely, if you can have those kinds of things, it's just wonderful. There's a ton of one-off stories. I did the review of it, like Punisher, Big Nothing. I talked about the Silver Surfer Parable before. There's a lot of books like that out there. There is a lot out there historically, and in terms of modern comics, there's still a lot out now. There are comics to read. I wish that and in particular, it feels like a wasted opportunity from the big two. You have a line. You can just kind of take 5 comics. You don't even need to be that many. Take 2 comics. Get a creative team that's going to be in it for the long haul. Put them in a dark room, lock the door, and just leave them alone for 5 years and let them craft one of these kind of epic legendary runs. It doesn't need to be about stunts and tying in and getting to this event or that event. Just get something on your hands that you'll be able to sell, omnibuses of it later. It's one of those cases where, hey, DC and Marvel, learn from what Kirkman did with Invincible. I have a feeling that as Invincible starts to roll out as a show, because the rights have been picked up, maybe people are going to get like, hey, wait a minute, we can just do something like that. The Boys was this way as well. I mean, just let somebody go nuts for a while with this universe, tell a bunch of comic stories, and not only will you have something huge to sell later, you have something very fond in people's hearts that they remember, and you'll probably have something to be optioned off into a pretty powerful movie or TV series. I mean, it's all this short term thinking that drives me a little bit nuts. But anyway, I like I said, that's a little bit of what's on my mind, what I look for, what I enjoy. I hope this was helpful. Like I said, this isn't going to be the biggest hit generator, but you asked and I answered. So, what do you think? What are some of your things? Do any of these really work for you? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media. Let me know if you want to talk comics. Fridays, I try and do live chats. A bit of a, it's always tough to do them, but I always do enjoy them. But most importantly, thanks for listening.